The dark scrolls. The first time you feel it, it doesn't come like a wind or a sudden storm. It seeps in. You're lying on your straw mattress, bones aching from days of work, wrapped in your only wool blanket. A coarse, scratchy thing passed down from your father. Your breath clouds the air, white and slow, and the fire has long since died. That is when you know. Winter has arrived. In the medieval world, winter didn't announce itself with snowflakes drifting down upon castle spires. It came with silence, with breath hanging heavy in still rooms, with children coughing through the night, and livestock drawing closer to the warmth of human skin. It wasn't simply cold. It was a creeping, living thing that took hold of your thatched roof and pressed its fingers into every crack, every joint in your bones, every whisper of your will. Outside, the ground has long hardened into frost-bitten clay, a graveyard of green. Fields are dead, trees skeletal. There are no birds, no sound but the crunch of ice underfoot and the groans of wood contracting in the cold. But it is what's inside the home that tells the true horror of a medieval winter. Your house is not a house as we know it today. It is a crude hut, wooden beams lashed together with twine and sealed, if one can call it that, with mud, dung, and straw. Walls leak wind. Roofs are sagging under wet moss and snow, liable to collapse if the weight grows too much. And windows, if they exist at all, are just holes with stretched animal hides pulled taut like wet parchment. Light filters in dimly, but warmth does not. You wake not to sunlight, but to the sharp stab of cold through your nose, your feet already numb. Your breath forms little clouds over your chest, hanging in the air like spirits of warmth lost. The fire is out. The coals are gray. You can't waste wood to keep a fire going all night, not when winter has just begun. Every piece of timber is precious, sometimes stolen, sometimes begged for. Sometimes people will even burn furniture, doors, or pieces of fencing, anything to keep the frost from winning. You share your bed with lice, fleas, and sometimes rats. Your mattress is straw, flattened and brittle, a haven for crawling life that feasts on your skin at night. You scratch without realizing. The itches are constant. Your bed is shared with your siblings, your spouse, sometimes even the neighbor's child or the town beggar if things have gone truly wrong. Crowding is not discomfort. It is survival. The more bodies, the more heat. Dogs and pigs are welcome in the sleeping quarters, not out of affection but necessity. Their warmth keeps you alive. Their stink becomes the background hum of daily life. Clothing is no comfort. You wear the same wool tunic for weeks, maybe months. It's stiff with dirt and sweat, but it's all you have. Layers are your only protection, though most people can't afford more than a couple. There are no goose-down coats, no insulated boots, just wool and leather and the prayers that your feet don't rot from within your shoes. And you do not change into anything softer for sleep. You sleep in what you work in, what you eat in, what you bury your neighbors in. The kitchen, if it can be called that, is a hearth in the center of the room, often just a circle of stone and a blackened cauldron. If you have vegetables, they're from the root cellar. Turnips, parsnips, maybe a cabbage if the rats haven't chewed through it. Meat is rare in winter unless you've slaughtered an animal for the Feast of St. Martin's, or you're fortunate enough to own a pig fattened during the autumn. And even then, that meat must be salted, dried, or smoked. It cannot be wasted. But you don't eat in abundance. You ration. Every bite must last. Every meal must count. A thick, oily porridge made from barley or millet might be your dinner for weeks. A crust of rye bread, hard as stone, dipped in warm broth, passes for a feast. And yet, you learn to trick your body. You eat more at night, even if it means going hungry during the day, because digestion produces warmth. The heat from your belly becomes a furnace for the rest of you. It is a science of desperation. Even breathing changes. Inhale through your nose, slowly, deliberately. The monks say that the devil rides in on a frozen breath taken too quickly. But you know the truth. Breathe too fast and your lungs will burn, freeze from within. You learn to breathe like the old do, quiet, shallow, with lips closed and shoulders hunched. When night falls, it brings with it the true terror. The silence, the stillness. The hours feel endless. The wind howls like wolves, scraping at your door. Children cry, not from fear, but from the hunger that keeps gnawing even in sleep. Parents whisper in the dark, not sweet lullabies, but calculations. How long the grain will last. Who might be convinced to trade eggs for firewood? Whether it is worth risking a journey to the next village. And then there is the cold itself, the kind that doesn't just prick your skin, but crawls into your joints and nestles between your ribs. You wrap a hot stone, warmed in the fire during the day, in cloth and tuck it beneath your blanket. It loses its heat in an hour, but sometimes that hour is all that stands between waking and never waking again. You are not alone in your dread. The village understands that winter is not a season, it is a siege. Fires are tended in shifts. If a neighbor's chimney ceases to smoke, someone checks. To let the fire go out is to invite death. So even in poverty, people share. They lend a log, offer broth, light another family's hearth. For tomorrow it might be yours that dies. In the dark, prayers rise like breath in the cold. Candles flicker before saints carved in wood or painted on cracked walls. The Virgin Mary watches over the corner where the baby sleeps. Sancta Maria, ora pro nobis. Holy Mary, pray for us. Because in a world where snow falls like judgment and the wind speaks in tongues, God is the only thing left to bargain with. Winter was not a poetic backdrop for knights and princesses. It was a living beast that clawed at every soul, from peasant to noble. And it was not just the cold that brought suffering, but what followed in its wake: hunger, illness, madness. By the time the first frost fell, people were already remembering the winter of 1315, the Great Famine, the year the rains never stopped and the harvest failed. That was the winter of graves dug into frozen ground, of mothers laying down beside their children to die together. Some say it was the year that turned saints into thieves and priests into mourners. And so, when the wind rattles the roof and the windows sweat ice, you close your eyes and pretend. You dream of summer, of wheat, of sun. But the truth remains. This is only the beginning. The days grow shorter. The light fades before supper, and the sun barely brushes the horizon by midday. Time becomes warped in winter. It's not measured in hours or bells, but in firewood stacks and how many times you can reuse a single bowl of broth. Mornings are slow to come. When they do, they reveal no change, just more gray, more frost. And soon the frost becomes snow. Snow was not beautiful. It was not a white blanket upon the land, not a silent wonder to admire from window panes. Snow was death in disguise. It blocked roads and buried crops. It soaked into roofs until they buckled. It filled shoes, soaked clothes, and became ice that froze in hair, in beards, in nostrils. Children lost fingers. Grandmothers slipped on frozen paths and were never seen again. You feared the first snow not because it came suddenly, but because it never left. And beneath that snow, food lay hidden, or worse, ruined. Winter was a thief. It robbed not only warmth, but sustenance. Any mistake in storage meant starvation. A barrel of apples gone to rot. A wheel of cheese that molded in the wrong corner. The meat that had not been cured long enough now crawling with maggots. No amount of prayers could revive spoiled food. You learned to eat what could not be saved. Organs, skins, bones boiled into thin soups. Salt was gold, vinegar, a miracle, and honey, rare and precious, could preserve fruits or roots, though most never saw enough of it. Root cellars became sanctuaries. Dug into earth, cold and damp but sheltered, these were filled in autumn with whatever the harvest yielded: carrots, onions, parsnips. But even these, if too cold, froze solid, then thawed and turned to mush. The haybox became a secret weapon. Not a box made of hay, but a box filled with hay, a nest of warmth. You would bring a pot to a quick boil over fire, then seal it inside the haybox. Hours later, it was still warm. You had saved wood, saved time. Some mothers used it to prepare porridge before dawn, letting it cook while the family still slept. Some used it for herbal stews, fragrant with thyme or nettle, if they had any herbs left at all. Firewood was the currency of life. Whole families spent autumn scavenging. Children with arms full of kindling, men dragging fallen branches home like prized stags. But green wood smoked too much. It was the dry wood that burned clean, and it was always in short supply. A family might keep a bundle under their bed, hidden like treasure. Some resorted to burning dung, a foul but necessary alternative. The smell stayed with you, thick, bitter, sharp. Inside the home there was no such thing as privacy. The room was a single space shared by all: the bed, the hearth, the bench where tools lay. Babies slept in troughs, elders huddled near the fire, wrapped in shawls and blankets made of patched linen. The air was heavy with moisture, steam from pots, sweat from bodies, smoke from the fire that never quite drew properly. Chimneys were rare. Smoke often clung low to the ceiling, turning it black. And then there were the animals. Cows, goats, chickens, your livelihood, could not survive in the cold outside. So they came in, not just into barns, but into your home itself. A cow might sleep in the corner, her breath forming clouds in the night. Pigs snored beneath the table, chickens roosted in the rafters. Their heat was welcome, their waste less so. The floor turned into a frozen sludge of straw, dung, and ash. You stopped noticing the smell, or rather you learned to live beneath it. Clothing was layered but threadbare. Wool tunics over linen shifts, patched stockings tied with scraps of leather. Gloves were rare. You used mittens or simply wrapped your hands in cloth. Boots were often homemade, leather stretched over wood soles, stuffed with straw. Wet feet were a constant threat. Once wet, they rarely dried. Frostbite was not a word people used, but they knew its signs: black toes, blistered heels, the loss of feeling that never returned. People learned tricks: a warmed stone from the hearth, wrapped in cloth, tucked beneath the blanket. Not for luxury, but for survival. Women boiled water, poured it into clay jugs, held them to their stomachs. Old men placed hands near the fire and quickly buried them in furs, trapping the fleeting heat. Everyone became a student of heat retention. You did not waste breath talking about the cold. You learned how to resist it. In the fields, work didn't stop. It simply changed. Tools had to be repaired. Sleds had to be readied for wood hauling. Men ventured into forests with axes, cutting down branches, risking injury for just enough to keep a fire lit through the night. A broken arm could mean death, infection, gangrene, all from slipping on a root under snow. Worse than the cold, however, was the hunger. Children grew quiet when hungry, not crying, not whining, just still. The kind of stillness that made a mother afraid. They wrapped themselves in the corners of the room, clutching dolls made of sticks and rags, their eyes wide. A bowl of pottage was all that stood between them and sickness, and sometimes even that was not enough. Diarrhea in winter was a sentence. You would waste away faster than the fire could warm you. Famine came not all at once, but in stages. It began with the thinning of stews, then the silence after dinner, then empty larders and locked root cellars, then the sharing of nothing. No one starved overnight. Starvation was a slow, creeping guest, one that moved in, sat at the hearth, and waited for someone to stop moving. And always, there were the memories. The Great Famine of 1315 haunted every hearthside story. That year, the rains came and didn't leave. Crops rotted in the fields, livestock drowned in their pens. There were no carts laden with grain, no millers with flour to sell. People ate grass, bark, dead animals. Some whispered of worse things, of unspeakable choices made in the dark corners of desperate cottages. Old women still muttered prayers against that year, as if the hunger of it could rise again like a ghost. That winter took thousands. No one kept accurate counts. There were no grave markers, just mounds of snow over bodies too stiff to bury. Some were never found until the thaw. Children huddled around corpses. Parents chose which child would eat and which would sleep on an empty stomach. So in ordinary winters, those not plagued by rain or rot, people became cautious. They rationed, they planned. A family might go without meat for a week, not because they couldn't, but because they remembered those who had none at all. They bartered, a woven basket for 2 eggs, a loaf of black bread for a half-sack of barley. Every neighbor became a market, every visit a negotiation between hunger and charity. And yet, in all this darkness, there was something strange. People endured. They didn't simply lie down and die. They adapted. They survived with customs, with rituals, with hope stitched into their daily lives. Some families hung herbs in doorways, not because they believed it kept away sickness, but because it smelled better than the rest of the house. Some sang songs around the fire, hymns, tales of saints who survived worse. Children were told stories, not of dragons or kings, but of springs that eventually came, of lambs born in snow, of years when the barley rose high. And of course there was the church. God was not distant in winter. He was everywhere, in the cold wind that battered the chapel door, in the frozen font where holy water turned to ice, in the candle flame trembling in the nave. The faithful came wrapped in cloaks and silence. Kneeling on frozen stone, they whispered their petitions for warmth, for health, for the ground to soften. The priest, often no richer than his flock, wore wool vestments, his fingers chapped, his lips pale. But he preached hope. That winter was not punishment, but preparation. That suffering was holy. That Christ, too, knew cold. That Mary, too, watched her child shiver. In every sermon was a promise. Spring will come. They lit candles, not just 1 or 2, but rows of them, flickering golden against the dark nave, for the dead, for the sick, for the harvests yet to be. Some believed that the light itself warmed the soul. Others believed it reminded God not to forget them. Feast days punctuated the gloom. St. Nicholas Day in December, Epiphany in January, the Feast of Candlemas in February. These were not indulgent affairs. They were humble celebrations, bread baked into special shapes, dances around indoor fires, and sometimes, if luck held, a small piece of preserved meat shared among many. It was not joy, but defiance. In winter, every moment of life was resistance. Against cold, against hunger, against the darkness that tried so hard to convince you that nothing would ever bloom again. And still, people survived, not because of strength, but because of each other. They shared, they watched, they waited. For the sound of birds, for the crack of thawing ice, for the whisper of green beneath the white. But before that, the cold still had more to give. By the 3rd month, winter becomes a religion of repetition. Every act is ritual. Every motion learned through the echo of yesterday. You do not live for pleasure. You live for preservation. The days blur. The snow, once new and powdery, is now gray, tamped into ice by wooden soles and hooves. It climbs the sides of homes, choking doorways, turning lanes into white corridors. The sun rises lazily and falls before you've boiled the second pot of gruel. The calendar, if you had one, would tell you it's January. But time in a peasant's life isn't marked by dates, it's marked by how much food remains in the larder. You no longer feel cold the same way. It has entered your bones. It lives in your spine. When you wake, it is there. When you eat, it sits beside you. You don't flinch anymore when the wind cuts across your cheeks. That pain is gone, replaced by numbness. There's no luxury in being surprised by discomfort. Cold is simply part of the body now, like hunger and silence. And the silence is the loudest thing of all. There are no birds, no insects. Even the animals have gone quiet. The chickens cluck softly, conserving energy. The cow only moans when milked. Dogs lie curled near the hearth, their eyes barely open. Babies do not cry often. They sleep longer in winter, though no one is certain why. Some say it's because the cold keeps them quiet. Others whisper darker theories, that hunger hushes their cries before it steals their breath. And then there is illness. In the medieval winter, illness was as common as smoke and just as suffocating. Coughs spread through homes like whispered curses. Phlegm turned crimson. Fevers took hold and did not release. There were no doctors, only herbs, poultices, and prayers. The midwife, if she had survived childbirth herself, might offer sage tea or place a coin beneath the tongue. The priest came with his vial of holy oil, his voice soft as frost as he intoned the last rites. Children were lost easily, their bodies too small to fight off the chill, their skin too thin, their breath too short. Mothers watched them fade, slowly, over days, curled against their breasts, warmth shared between life and death. Fathers dug graves in frozen earth, hacking at the ground with picks. Some couldn't. Some wrapped the child in linen and waited for spring. Grief had no time to take root in winter. Survival demanded attention. You could mourn, but only after the fire was lit, after the snow was swept from the threshold, after the animals had been fed. The dead were buried quickly, sometimes in shallow graves that would later be dug again by animals or thaw. And yet, for many, there was relief in death. Relief that a mouth no longer needed feeding, that a soul had escaped the suffering of this world. The body became a machine in winter. Your own flesh was a tool, a barrier against the elements. It had to be fed just enough. It had to be used wisely. You learned how to sit still, how to move slowly, how to store every ounce of warmth like a miser hoarding coins. Children were taught not to run inside. To waste energy was to tempt death. And still, life clung to its corners. In the darkest weeks of February, something strange began to happen. Women began to laugh again, quietly under their breath. Men shared gossip at the well, even if their boots were soaked with slush. Children dared to play, briefly, in the snowbanks, throwing clumps of ice with half-frozen fingers. These were not signs of joy, they were signs of endurance, that the soul had not frozen, even if the fields had. The communal spirit, which held people together like twine through the season, grew stronger as supplies grew weaker. Villages shared more in late winter than in early, perhaps because the illusion of hoarding had shattered. Perhaps because everyone knew that the neighbor's fire going out today might mean yours going out tomorrow. Fires were kept lit by agreement. One family might wake every 3 hours to tend a communal hearth. Another might send children to check on the widow down the lane. Bread was baked not for feasting, but for filling. Flat, thick, and hard, it could last a week. It scraped the roof of your mouth, but sat like a stone in the stomach, a blessing in times of famine. Lent came as it always did, though most were already fasting in truth. The church declared it a holy season of abstinence, penance, and silence. But peasants knew no difference between religious fasting and enforced hunger. Still, the rituals mattered. They reminded people of rhythms greater than the seasons, of spring, of resurrection. Ash Wednesday marked something else, too, the knowledge that the worst was nearly over. Some winters refused to let go. They lingered. The frost bit into March and sometimes April, but even then signs began to appear. A trickle of water through the streets where snow had begun to melt. A bird call, distant and uncertain, but unmistakable. A patch of brown earth on the hillside. It was dangerous to hope. Yet they did. The church bell rang differently in late winter. Slower. Not from sorrow, but from fatigue. Even the bell seemed to tire from the months of toil. Masses grew more crowded. People came not only to worship, but to be warm. The nave was the only space where candles burned for hours, where bodies clustered in silent communion. Faith, yes, but also fellowship. And from the pulpit, hope was spoken aloud. The priest would read from the Psalms. He makes springs pour water into the ravines. It flows between the mountains. He gives grass to grow for the cattle and plants for people to cultivate. The words tasted like honey, like the sweetness of a world not yet returned but promised. But the body was not so quick to believe. When the first true thaw came, it came not with joy but dread. Because beneath the snow lay the aftermath, the bones of animals that hadn't made it, the rotted food that couldn't be eaten, the broken carts and snapped beams, and sometimes the dead that had been hidden in the snow banks, under blankets, in barns, people lost in storms, old men who died in their chairs, children never awakened, and still the living cleaned. They shoveled, they burned refuse, they dragged what could be salvaged from the muck. They prepared for the spring planting, even though their hands were still stiff, their faces still sallow. The winter had taken weight and color and sometimes speech, but it had not taken everything. And this, too, was part of the pattern. People did not survive winter because they were brave. They survived because they obeyed its rules. They learned its rhythm. They surrendered to its tempo of hunger, stillness, and silence. Those who fought too hard, who worked too long, who tried to outpace it, they died. But those who bent like reeds, who kept faith with the dark, who knew when to rest and when to rise, those people saw the thaw. They heard the cracking of ice on the eaves like a song. They felt mud beneath their shoes and welcomed its filth as a blessing. They smiled finally, but not widely. Not yet, because spring was not yet here, only the idea of it. And in the medieval world, hope had to be rationed too. You do not trust spring at first. It begins not with warmth, but with the dripping of water, a slow, rhythmic tap from the eaves, like the ticking of some ancient clock. The snow melts unevenly, slowly, then in great floods that pour down streets and into cellars, flooding the very spaces that protected you only weeks ago. The cold remains, not sharp anymore, but wet. Dampness replaces frost. And with it comes another season altogether. Rot. The world, long frozen, begins to breathe again. But the breath is foul. Beneath the snow lie months of hidden decay. Animal carcasses, manure, spoiled vegetables, forgotten trash, human waste that could not be buried deep enough. All of it rises now in the thaw, releasing a stench that rides the air like a curse. It clings to clothing, to hair, to the walls of the church, and you welcome it, because it means the earth is soft again. But spring is not gentle. It demands labor. Before the last patches of snow have vanished, the village begins to move like ants over wet soil. Men drag plows from sheds, their wood swollen and warped from damp. Women prepare seeds saved from last autumn, if any survived the rats and mold. Children are sent into the fields to pick stones, to clear the ditches choked with runoff. No one is exempt. Even the lame and the elderly are given some task, even if only to sit and guard the embers of a new fire. And yet, no one has truly recovered. Winter did not leave quietly. It stole more than lives. It thinned muscles. It hollowed cheeks. It took laughter and left in its place a weariness that clung to the skin like a second layer of dirt. Even the healthiest man now walks with a limp. Even the strongest woman hides a cough behind her hand. Hunger is no longer urgent, but it is not forgotten. Your stomach growls with memory. The livestock emerge, blinking into the light, thinner, slower. The cow gives less milk. The sow has fewer piglets. Chickens refuse to lay. Some animals did not make it. A few were eaten. A few simply froze, their bodies now hauled away in carts to be buried deep or burned outside the village. Still, the people speak again. Around the well, old women gossip once more. They speak of whose chimney smoked all winter and whose did not. They recall which children cried most and which fell silent too soon. They whisper of strange dreams and ghostly visitations common in the depths of cold and hunger. One man claims he saw his dead brother sitting by the hearth, warning him not to eat the last onion. Another swears he heard singing from the woods during a blizzard and followed it to find the body of a shepherd frozen upright in the snow. These stories are not told to frighten. They are told because they are real, real in the way only hardship can be, because suffering needs witnesses. And then the earth answers. Green shoots break through the muck. The first crocus. The first blade of grass not trampled or dead. The trees bud. Birds return in noisy flocks. The sun no longer slants low but climbs high, casting long golden light into corners where shadows have reigned for months. The entire village gathers for the first warm day. Not for any feast, just to feel it, to tilt their heads back, to believe. The priest walks through the street with his hands raised, blessing the fields, the doorways, the animals, the infants. It is a ritual as old as soil, a blessing not just on crops, but on survival. And though few say it aloud, everyone is thinking the same thing. We made it. Not all of us, but enough. At night, fires still burn, but now they are smaller, less desperate. The stone warms sooner. The draft under the door is no longer cruel. You sleep with one less layer. The air smells of wet leaves and dung and something else. Life. But the scars remain. Winter in the medieval world is not a chapter that ends. It is a scar across the calendar, a wound that reopens each year. The people who survived it carry it with them, in their bones, in their memories, in the way they gather wood even on warm days, just in case, in the way they plant extra beans, salt, more fish, dry more apples. They are never unprepared again. And there is pride, too, quiet but fierce. The woman who buried her husband still rises to knead bread before dawn. The boy who nearly froze in the stable now walks the field barefoot, testing the soil. The man who gave his last loaf to a stranger now has a new child in his arms. No one congratulates each other. That is not the way. But they nod. They smile with their eyes. And the world turns. Years will pass. New winters will come. And with them, new children who will not remember what was lost. But the stories will remain, told in the dim light of the hearth, in the words etched on wooden crosses, in the faded tapestries that hang behind the altar. Stories of nights so cold the fire cracked in fear, of candles kept burning by sheer will, of hands held beneath furs until the shaking stopped, of hunger so deep it stole dreams, and of spring, always spring, arriving like a promise kept. Because winter in the Middle Ages was never just a season, it was a reckoning. And survival was not merely endurance, it was defiance. A prayer whispered with cracked lips, a loaf shared by candlelight, a step taken through snow again and again and again until the thaw. Until the thaw. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.